Hi there everyone, I'm with Ellen, the picture curator here at the Royal Society. We're in the Fellows Room. This is like a secret room where Royal Society Fellows come to talk about science and mystery and play Scrabble and stuff like that. But we have a really big mystery in this room. We have paintings of people and we don't know who they are. And that's the job you are on at the moment. Ellen, show us, what have we got?
Well, in this corner, we have what we think are two marriage portraits.
So we've got a man and a woman here, and we've got a man and a woman here.
Yep.
And we think these are marriage portraits, and we know who the men are.
Yep. So on this side we have Abraham Hill. So Abraham was a founding fellow of the Society, which means he's been here since 1660, at the very beginning. His work seems to have been largely administrative, so not as glamorous as some of the other founding fellows. He worked as a council member, as secretary of the Royal Society, and as treasurer. We also know that outside of the RS, those kind of capabilities continued. He was assistant to the Royal African Company, which was a trading company set up to trade with the west coast, along the west coast of Africa. Although it was kind of set up initially to trade in natural goods, it did eventually incorporate enslaved peoples. And so what we're trying to do with Abraham is just work that into his caption, his story.
Yeah.
That legacy is obviously important to the RS because the RS was a stockholder in the Royal Africa Company. So with this research project, we're just trying to understand that more and bring it to the front.
Sensitive subject being dealt with appropriately. Yeah. And this chap here, who's this?
So this is Cyril Wyche. Wyche was slightly later. He was an original fellow of the RS, so 1663. Again, he was quite active within the society, so we're talking council, vice president, and actually president of the RS as well. And outside of the RS, largely a politician. So he sat on the House of Commons, sat on almost every parliament in the 1660s and 80s, and later worked as chief secretary for Ireland as well. We were really pleased to get this portrait because he filled one of the holes. We like to have portraits of all our presidents, and we didn't have one of Wyche for a long time. We acquired this in 2019.
So these are two gentlemen you know quite a bit about, quite esteemed, accomplished men. You would have thought in these biographies you would know quite a bit about their wives.
Yeah.
You would at least know their names.
Yeah, the sad truth of the matter is often female portraits are less knowable. The wives of fellows, they're not as present in the written records, and often that means we don't know as much about the likeness. In this case, we don't know exactly which of Abraham's wives this is.
So he had more than one wife?
Exactly. Okay. So he married Anne Hill, previously Anne Whitelocke, in 1657. And in 1661 he married Elizabeth Pratt. So we have two names.
But you don't know which one that is?
That's what we're working on at the moment. I've been looking quite closely at the fashion of these pieces to try and narrow the window down as closely as I can. There are certain details in this portrait which would suggest, if she is incredibly fashionable and adhering to the kind of the vogue or the mode of the time, it would point towards the 1650s rather than the 1660s. The colours are quite bright here, orange, blue. That was much more common in the 1650s. Likenesses in the 1660s go for a much paler colour palette. Likewise, the hair is quite relaxed by comparison to later hairstyles. So in the 1660s, these curls get really tight and high, and the bun is right at the top of the head, whereas this is quite relaxed. And again, that does suggest the 1650s rather than the 1660s.
So you think probably the first wife?
So we're leaning towards the first wife.
What's her name again?
Her name was Anne.
That's Anne.
Yeah. Unfortunately, nothing in the Hill family papers has identified this woman. So it does pose an interesting question, and I think we're going to have to, in the redisplay of these portraits, introduce her as probably Anne Hill, but also the possibility that it's Elizabeth, because we don't want to write anyone out of history or the story, and we're not 100% sure, and you can't always be when you're talking 300 years ago.
Is there anything scientific you can do? Sometimes,
yeah, like an analysis of canvas can be very telling. Just the weave of it can help date down to decades, similarly to fashion. That could be a next step for this portrait, but it's not something within my reach at the moment.
Have you taken it out? Have you looked at the back of it?
Yeah, we've looked at the back of it, and
there's nothing written there?
There's nothing written, unfortunately. I've read her father's diary, I've read all sorts of material around Anne, but there's just nothing, unfortunately. yet.
Looking in her eyes now, I feel this like,
Yeah.
there's something there to me, like she's calling out to me, no, this is who I am.
I very much feel like that as well.
Let's look at our other mystery lady.
Okay.
All right, now here's Lady Wyche. Now you'd think the wife of a big famous parliamentarian, that would be well documented. We'd know who this is for sure.
Yeah, you would think so. Unfortunately, this one is even more elusive. We were originally working under the auspices that this was Wyche's third wife.
How many did he have?
He had 3.
3, okay.
He had 3 wives. Based on a detail that we uncovered as part of the conservation process of this portrait, we found there is a partial signature, G, K, N, and below it there's a 1-7, so a partial date. It would seem to date the portrait to the early 18th century, the early 1700s, which would mean it had to be one particular woman, Wyche's third wife, because that aligns with the dates at which they were married. And that is very tempting to kind of believe, but there is just no further evidence in support of that. It was purchased by the Royal Society in 2019 with this portrait from a private collection, and we know where they got it from. However, the provenance for this portrait is so strong. It hung in Hockwold Hall, which is former home for hundreds of years until the late 20th century, and that's really well documented. But this portrait doesn't appear in those documents at all, so we think it might have hung alongside this one, but there's just no proof.
So if this is the third wife, who is it?
Wyche's third wife was Mary, and she was actually formerly Mary Evelyn, so the niece of John Evelyn, famous diarist and FRS.
Right.
The real breakthrough for us in this is the signature, because G-N-E would suggest it's a Godfrey Kneller portrait.
Godfrey Kneller?
Godfrey Kneller, yeah.
I don't know that. Is that a famous artist?
Yeah, he was pretty big in the late 17th century, early 18th century. There are lots of things about this which confirm that attribution, but from the hands to the composition and similarities to sketches of Kneller's, it looks promising.
So this is a big research project for you, and I know you've been reading all sorts of documents and uncovering whatever you can. What would be the dream find for you?
So Wyche actually has an account book in the Norfolk Records Office, and it's really detailed, and I've been poring over it, and in that there are some references to picture drawers and painters. So what you really want is a record of paid X amount to ye painter or ye picture drawer, Sir Godfrey Kneller, for a picture of my wife, or for a picture of myself. That is the dream. We have found lots of leads in the account book, which I am continuing to follow up. With this portrait, which we think, because of the partial signature, dates to the early 18th century, it has proven a lot harder to date through the fashion, because this dress actually was popular for a good 20-30 year window. So all we can really say is that it was kind of 1700s to 1720s, 30s. So again, it would suggest Mary, but we're just struggling to confirm that with any written records.
I'm going to get a bit Da Vinci Code on you here. I think she's trying to tell us the answer. Look, she's pointing, right? She's pointing to this piece of architecture.
Yeah.
If you can find out where that is, what house that is, and if that's a house they were living at a certain time in a certain year, you'll solve the whole puzzle. You'll crack it wide open. There.
Yeah, interesting that you point that out, because these two, really, they should be facing each other. And she's pointing to an outdoor area. And then, although it's much darker, you can see that there is an outdoor area on the right-hand side of Wyche.
And there's a statue.
With a statue as well.
Where is that statue? Where is that painted?
I'm actually looking really closely at the statue at the moment.
Really?
Because there are certain painters who are more known for incorporating architectural elements and statues into their portraits. So I'm zoning in on that statue a little bit. But the fact that they both have this glimmer of the outside world,
that's your clue.
In the middle, it seems like it's worth investigating.
I love this stuff. This is proper, like, detective archive work. What about this coat of arms? Maybe that could tell you something.
So yeah, this has been really helpful actually with this portrait. So you can see that the shield itself, which is the central piece, is quartered, and then it has what's called an inescutcheon of pretense in the middle. So the blue and white is the Wyche family arms, and the red and white is the Brett family arms. So the Brett family were a family that the Wyches married into prior to Cyril. The shield in the middle is actually the arms of the Jermyn family. Now this is a bit of a confusing one. It's a bit of a red herring because Jermyn was the family name of Wyche's first wife, Elizabeth.
That is a spanner in the works.
Yeah, so...
Why would he have that if
It's very possible that these were painted at different times. So he painted this one prior to his second marriage or during his first marriage, and this one came later.
Yeah.
But there's a lot about this portrait which suggests that he was married to Elizabeth in 1670s. She died in 78. And this looks a bit later than that. So it's really interesting. I mean, it's possible that his coat of arms remained unchanged despite second and third marriages. It would be unusual, I'm told, by the College of Arms, but family politics always come into these things, and it's possible that that's what happened. I'm so grateful to the Understanding British Portrait Network that's kind of allowing this research. I feel like I could be researching these portraits for years because there's just more and more to find out.
We must return to this when it gets cracked. Watch this space. It's the most valuable painting here at the Royal Society, and it is of the most famous scientist of them all. Can you guess who it is? Let's go and have a look. It's Keith. That's not who the portrait's of. That's Keith. That is the portrait. He's a bit younger than maybe you've usually seen him. This is probably him in his absolute heyday. I'm sure you already know who it is. Keith, put us out of our misery.
Well, here we have Albert Einstein by Max Liebermann.